So just as Mike talked about the use of augmented reality in retail, there are lots of applications for augmented reality in enterprise, and the one that we're focused on is how to help companies with the sales and marketing process for complex products and solutions. So for Kaon, our typical customer is a large company that has complex products, complex solutions, and a complex sales cycle. And in fact, that's one of the trends that's happening in the world, is things are getting more complex, not more simple. So how to help those companies sell their products and market them in a way where their competitive differentiators are highlighted, that's the key challenge that Kaon typically takes on. And these are some of the companies and some of the kinds of things that we do. And recently, in the last 18 months, we have taken our software platform and added augmented reality and virtual reality capability to this. And as a consequence, it's been recognized as one of the leading use cases for augmented reality today. Earlier, we talked about AR and IA. Augmented reality, the technology, does it work? And IA, in action, what are the problems that you solve? So you've got to blend what problems lend themselves to this kind of technology, and is the technology ready? So here's some examples of how the technology is used today in production by literally hundreds of companies. So if you think about why marketing, marketing is all about telling a story. Good marketing is about connecting with your intended audience and telling the kind of story that resonates with them. So when you think about immersive technologies, you should think about the way that immersive technologies help you to tell that story better. Rather than just using a technology for technology's sake, what is it about your product, your service, your solution, how complex it is, how it is used, how it helps those customers, and how can you tell those stories? For example, one of the best use cases is to be able to take products, as Mike was talking about earlier, that are hard to ship around, they may be complex, and to help explain for those complex products the use case for a particular customer. And recently, one of the world's largest life sciences companies told us that using this capability that we built for them, they were able to actually sell these complex products without the customer ever having seen the product physically before. And the reason for that is it's not necessarily what the product looks like, although I'll talk about why that's important in a second, but it's about how the product works and how it's going to work for them. So thinking about using augmented reality and immersive technologies as a way to bring your stories to life. Bring the products to life, but bring the use cases and the stories to life. So when you're trying to create these engagements, there's actually 3 dimensions that you need to connect on. Most people really think about one of them, and I'll talk about that, and that's what we've talked about here. And early on, Patty talked about yesterday about different levels of sensory engagement. So she gave that one away. The first level is sensory engagement. And the more senses you can engage, the better you're going to be able to connect. What do you think the other 2 dimensions are that we need to connect with audiences if they're going to actually connect with our products besides sensory engagement? Emotion, right. As we've talked about before, buying and selling and making decisions is often thought of as an analytical process, but even for very large, expensive products and solutions and for B2B situations, people are making decisions, and people tend to make decisions based on the criteria of both the analytical and the emotional. So we have to find ways of connecting emotionally. What's the 3rd dimension that we have to connect with? Yeah, relevance. So that's basically an intellectual connection. So if you think about going to a trade show and having a VR experience at a booth somewhere where you're going on a roller coaster, that might have some emotional connection. You might actually get scared out of your wits. It might have a physical reaction too. Sometimes people get nauseous or throw up. And it might actually have some sensory interaction because you're feeling things. But what often happens, and the most common result is people leave that show and they say, I had this great VR experience at the trade show, but they don't remember the name of the company. It had nothing to do, it wasn't relevant. So you've got to have these other 2 components of engagement. There are always 3 dimensions that you need to be able to engage on in order to create this kind of connection. The sensory engagement, the intellectual engagement, there has to be some relevance, there has to be some knowledge transfer, and the emotional. It has to be fun. Sometimes even causing anger is a positive thing, because if you get somebody to say, why is my competitor doing that and I'm not, you've actually connected with them. So one way to do this is to use augmented reality as a way to connect the customer, their relevant situation, to your product and solution. And in the enterprise, what we found is that although there are lots of research areas in terms of new wearables and other kinds of technologies, the best way to connect, if you're talking about sales and marketing, is to get onto the devices that the customers have and that the sales and marketing and channel partner teams have. So what we focused on is the most deployed devices. We started working with Google on Tango, and that was very successful. But the most deployed devices are the Android devices and the iOS devices and PCs and Macs that everybody already has. And so the more you can connect with those devices, the more ubiquitous your solution is going to be. So being able to actually show real products in a virtual environment, in other words, put those digital products into the real environment, the more you'll be able to actually create that sense of connection and realism. And the use cases for this are quite interesting. Sometimes it's a sales meeting where you're going into a customer's environment and you're going to show them their product, your product in their environment. Sometimes it's a trade show, and here we can see where a pedestal was used to create the opportunity to show a variety of different products. And there are about 12 people using augmented reality on their regular devices, Android devices and their iPhones, to actually look at different products in that same space. And so being able to use these venues in an interesting way and to actually show your products where the product doesn't physically exist, there are lots of different venues for that. And it can actually create this connection between not only the end user, but also the people who are looking at it. And so this is why when Mike talked about 3D assets, this is critically important. Not only do you want to display the 2D data that talks about why your product is better, what the competitive differentiators are, but you actually want to show that product. And so here's an example of an application. This happens to be for Cisco, where you're actually using a 3D interactive solution to show the product and interacting with it. And then you're taking that to the next level, which is putting it into an augmented reality situation and taking that product and putting it into the environment that you're in. Now, the difference here is that it's not just sitting in an environment and you can walk around it, but you can actually interact with it. You can take it apart, and you can look at it in different ways and look at the inside components. The advantage of that, and here's another case where you actually get the product to operate, so you can create the exact way. If you look there, the robot arm was moving, and you were able to walk right into that device and see how that robot arm was moving and what it was actually doing. And if that's part of the sales process, if that's part of the way that you differentiate yourself, it's much better to get the customer to actually see that. And here we were doing it in an environment where the physical product wasn't there, and we could actually look at it from different angles and actually go right inside the product to see how that product operated. And that was a key differentiator for this kind of an environment. The third component that we talked about was that emotional connection. And here's an example, and take a look at this person's face when she's seeing the product that's relevant to her for the first time, even though it's not physically there. So being able to create relevance on all of those dimensions is really one of the ways that augmented reality creates an advantage, but it's not its own separate application. It's a component of your application. And this is where we've learned a lot of lessons. Mike Campbell and Mark talked about earlier today, the lessons that we've learned. We've been doing this now for a long time. And what we found is that applications can't just be about augmented reality. They've got to be about something where augmented reality adds to the experience. And so if you look at these kinds of applications, you're actually seeing how these marketing and sales applications are used, and then augmented reality is used to take it to the next level, where people can actually see those products, experience them in a way that they couldn't before. But if you just create these as augmented reality applications with no other context, their life cycle is going to be limited to that cool factor, and that's not going to be sustainable. So what I'm going to show you now quickly is, it's one quick video of a scene where we're going to actually take an augmented reality application, put it on a table, and use that not only to take a look at how, in this case, a company was demonstrating different vertical solutions, but also being able to interact with that application in real time as a 3D scene, not just a product. And as you can see, there's some interesting elements to it. There's animations, there's airplanes flying around, there's cars moving around, all of that kind of stuff. So let me show you an example before I end of something that's in 3D. And I'm going to just connect it up here in real time, and I hope that it works, because it's a demo. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just show you an example of one of these applications. This happens to be for Dell, where you can explore all different kinds of solutions, and you use these interactive applications to dive deep into any one of the particular product areas and the solution areas. And what you can see is that this is a way for sales and marketing teams to really explain and customers to learn about the products and solutions. But if I take that, and then here's a 3D version of a product. And I've taken one that's pretty simple, but there's a product just like it in the back of the room. So being able to see it in a customer's circumstance is pretty important. So being able to just actually put that here, and there's the product. Okay. So there it is, and I'm looking at it there. A few things are important about it. One, I can interact with it. Two, you'll notice that we solved the problem of occlusion. Remember we talked about, or some of the technology discussions have talked about how you're actually going to occlude objects, but you can see right through there, and you can see to the back, and then you can see what's going on in the room. If I turn it around, I'll be actually able to show you. I'll walk around to there, and you're in the back. I'll go right into the product, and there you are, right? Okay. And so what's important about this is several factors. One is it's actually to scale. So I'm not scaling this up and down, because that's what the real product would look like in real life, and that's the point of doing it in augmented reality. If I just did this 3D interactive demonstration on the iPad or on the Android device without augmented reality, you'd be able to see all of these components, but you wouldn't be able to see it in real life in 2 scale. So that's the 2 scale example. The other thing is that I can actually walk into the product and see things that you might not normally see. In fact, if I go right inside here, let's see what we can see. We can see inside the components and walk around the inside and go to the back and all of that, and I can come out the back end. And fortunately, I didn't injure myself. So that's an example. And the reason that I thought that would be useful is just following on from what Mike Fester just said. Things like how the product looks and what the textures are critically important. You'll notice that that product looked exactly like the physical product. And that's because we had, in fact, I'll put it back there just so that you can see it. That was taken, and we used very similar technologies. We actually take photographic textures. So that is exactly how the product would look. What we found is in enterprise applications, if you're trying to use these to get customers to really relate to them and to ultimately buy products and solutions that they might not physically have seen, they can't be these CAD renderings where they don't look realistic. Now, what's important is to think about the psychology of this. Nobody's going to buy this product based on the way that it looks. But interestingly enough, if it doesn't look realistic, this technology doesn't work. So you've got to find a way of blending both of those. The other thing you'll notice is that we've developed and we use this great tracking technology. The product's still there, even though we're looking in a variety of different directions. So let me show you another example of a use case. And this one's a little bit more complicated. So I'll describe it to you before I actually show it to you. Lots of people use applications, and we've created many, to show how products are configured and rooms are configured. So if you think about the Wayfair example, you're in your living room. I'm going to put that sofa in the living room. This is how it's going to look. That's great. In industrial applications for medical, scientific, manufacturing, IT, where you place your product is very important as well. So we've created several applications. This is one. I'll just show you one where you can drag and drop components into a space. And then in real time, in 3D, we can generate a view of that space. So there's that space. We just made it. So what's interesting about that is that space didn't exist 3 seconds ago. Now I've got it in augmented reality, in 3D. Now I'm actually going to put it on the floor here. And there it is. It's a tiny little lab. Not very useful unless we Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. However, I can actually scale that up to real size. And now I can actually walk around and see what the workflow would be. And I can examine the products, and I can see what they would look like in real space. So these kinds of applications are being used for a variety of purposes, not just to show the physical dimensions of the product, how it looks, but also how it works and why is it different, and then how is it going to work in your space. So we see augmented reality actually as one of the tools that's going to be used incrementally at an increasing rate over time. And the important aspect of this is that ultimately I think augmented reality and to some degree virtual reality are just going to become a feature of the way that we go to market. These are not just going to be separate applications. They're not going to be their own big development efforts. They're going to be features of the way that we present ourselves and the way that people and companies evaluate and make decisions about buying and selling products. Thank you very much.